believe how many months it took me to not have looping and feedback. So fun. Okay, so yeah, I think what I'll do here is I will probably, and what I generally do is I'm going to give the room my little intro spiel, and then I'll introduce you and turn things over to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Alrighty. Actually, for people online, I should probably stay here. I swear, always having to learn a process. Trying to provide a great experience for everyone. So educational. Let's see. Alright, almost ready. So everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started here. I will be facing this screen at least initially for the benefit of people online, but I'm talking to all of you as well. And we're going to get started, so I'm going to do it. All right. Welcome everyone, both in person and online, to the latest monthly installment of the EFF Austin Meetup. My name is Kevin Welch. I'm the current president of the board at EFF Austin. For those of you new to us and like, what's EFF Austin? Well, as you might gather from the name, we're an Austin-based digital civil liberties organization. We work closely with Electronic Frontier Foundation out of San Francisco. They're the nation's oldest and largest digital civil liberties advocacy group. And we kind of think of them as the ACLU for the internet. They work to protect your rights in emerging technological spaces, especially your First Amendment right to free speech and expression and your implicit Fourth Amendment right to privacy. They've been for many years advocating on a host of important issues, including things like net neutrality, end-to-end encryption, protecting Section 230 of the CDA, which is what allows you to generate content online, and recently following both the emergence of civil rights issues regarding AI, as well as other issues like age verification mandates and stuff. So yeah, they're very cool people. I encourage you to go learn more about them. They also work very closely with a lot of groups all around the country. You might know from our name, we've been around almost as long as them. They're 1990, I'm 1991. I've not been around with the group that long, but actually one of our original founders is here tonight if you'd like to learn more about the history. And yeah, so basically, unlike National EFF, who primarily does federal and occasional state advocacy, we're primarily city and state based. We mostly focus on issues here in the Austin area, occasionally at the state ledge as well. We've been very involved recently in the debates around certain surveillance technologies in Austin, like automated license plate readers. We've also been consulting with both the City of Austin and the Texas State Ledge on various AI regulations. So yeah, that's a little bit about what we do. We're going to have, and as I said, normally we do monthly meetups here at Capitol Factory, down here in Austin, second Tuesday of every month at 7 p.m. And yeah, they're probably the best way to join and get involved with the community if you want to learn more. We're going to have a number of fun talks coming up next year. We're going to have our board member, Kinsey Ryan, in January, probably talking to us a bit about her work with the Wikimedia Foundation. After all these years, we've actually not ever had a deep dive into Wikimedia and Wikipedia, so I'm looking forward to that one. And then in February, we're going to have UT's Dr. Sharon Strober talking to us about some of the research she's been doing around citizen attitudes toward automated license plate readers. Obviously, I have my opinions, but any good researcher or advocate needs to know what the public stands on an issue and what their thoughts are on it. So if you want to know not just what activists, but what the general public, who may not even know what this tech is, thinks about it, that's a good one to come and learn more. We're also in the early stages of planning a South by Southwest adjacent gathering in March. That's going to probably be at the Vortex Theater / Butterfly Bar on Friday, March 12th, around then. If you know somebody cool who'd like to be a keynote speaker for that, let us know. We may tentatively, fingers crossed, have Cory Doctorow if he's in town. We're really hoping. But yeah, if you know speakers who might want to participate in that, by all means, send them our way. Also, this Friday at at 7 p.m., we're going to be having our yearly annual holiday party. It's going to be at our board member Heather's Artistic Performance Lab, Grotto 101. You can ask me for more details about the event and how to RSVP, but that'll be this Friday at 7 p.m. Another good opportunity to meet your fellow digital suburban geeks. So I think that's what we have coming up here in the short term. So, in just a minute here, I'm going to turn things over to our speaker here after I give a little introduction. And I will say, we've had a number of pretty impressive people speak at our meetups over the years. We've had Bruce Schneier, the famous cryptographer. We've had Cindy Kahn, who led EFF for many years. We've had a lot of impressive people. We've had Cory Doctor, we've had Bruce Sterling, a lot of very impressive, very smart people. Peter Wang, CEO of Anaconda, a lot of cool people. But this one is not just one of the most illustrious speakers we've ever had speak with us, but one who has a very personal connection to me. A lot of how I started getting interested in a lot of the issues that I now devote myself to was as a teenager. I was involved at the UTCS department when it was run by the man who was going to be giving our talk tonight, Dr. Benjamin Kuipers. He was the head of the department at the time. And long before AI was anything but the interest of extreme nerds like myself, I was doing some research with him on early stuff related to autonomous vehicles using a technique called reverse huff transforms, which I'm sure is not used in any of the latest and greatest stuff now, but was very cool and cutting edge at the time. So, I figured with everything going on with AI, I figured who better than Ben to come back and talk with us about AI. And just to set the stage for truly what an impressive career he's had, yes, he is the Professor Emeritus of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Michigan. He was previously an endowed professor in computer sciences at the University of Texas at Austin, where he served as department chair. He received his BA from Swarthmore College, his Ph.D. from MIT, and he is a fellow of AAAI, IEEE, and AAAS. His research in artificial intelligence and robotics has focused on the representation, learning, and use of foundational domains of knowledge, including knowledge of space, dynamical change, objects, and actions. He is currently investigating ethics as a foundational domain of knowledge for robots and other AIs that may act as members of human society. And when Ben told me that was what his current research focus was, I thought, well, that's just wonderful, because we're hearing so much about AI and ethics these days. A lot of it, to be blunt, I feel, from very emotional places, and maybe not from a really reasoned analysis of the pros and cons of this technology in an ethical framework. We have people who seem to think it's going to cure all our problems, completely ignoring any potential ethical harms. And on the flip side, we have people who are so convinced that it's going to kill us all or destroy the world that they argue that even using AI in any capacity somehow represents a moral evil. Somehow I feel neither of these positions is the true path to wisdom. And so, given that it's literally his research specialty right now, I figured who better than to talk to us about AI and ethics than Dr. Benjamin Kuipers. So, Ben, it is an honor to have you here. I'm so happy you agreed to do this, and I'm going to turn things over to you.
Well, thanks very much. I really appreciate the honor of being invited to speak to you. This is great. So let me see how long it takes to share a screen.
The more we know about programming, the harder it is to get our computers to do simple things. It's true.
Oh. So now I seem to need to connect.
Let's see. I think you should have all the permissions you need, at least.
I think so, but what happened is that the Cisco secure client window has popped up, and that's not what I want to share.
You don't want to share that. How surprising.
Yeah, right. Now the question is, how do I get to the window I do want to share? This window. Okay.
Oh, there we go. We figured it out. Right.
There we go.
Alrighty.
All right. So, I now am just talking to my slides, and I can't see you guys. So if you have anything you want to say, you'll have to talk and get my attention.
I will be moderating then, and yes, we do encourage discussion, although I'll probably ask people to mostly keep their questions till after you finish your main presentation. But I'll let you know if somebody has a question.
Okay, well, So as you know, people are worried about AI, and they hope perhaps ethics will help. And so part of the question is, what is ethics anyway? How can we think about it from the perspective of someone who works on AI, and what does it do for us? And so I have a few humble opinions on that. Incidentally, I should tell you, by the way, I don't put this in writing anywhere, but I am actually 2 emeritus professors, and one of them is at the University of Texas at Austin, and the other one is at the University of Michigan. So I am a local boy.
Yes.
So, who am I? Well, I'm Ben Kuipers, and I've been working in AI since 1973. It turns out to be an awfully long time ago. And in my opinion, AI is one of the handful of great scientific revolutions going on. And it's that kind of thing because we need to have a science of the mind. The mind is a phenomenon in the world. And in order to understand that, in order to build hypotheses about how the mind works, we need an adequate mathematics. And so, way back a long time ago, I hoped that when I went to college and could take a psychology course, that I would learn how the science of the mind went. And I was enormously disappointed because the interesting parts weren't rigorous and the rigorous parts weren't interesting. And then later on, after getting to graduate school and taking a course on AI, I discovered that there was the beginnings of the mathematics that would let you frame and state a rigorous science of the mind. So now I spent my career looking at common sense knowledge and trying to thinking of common sense as made up of certain foundational domains. Common sense knowledge is also characterized by reasoning effectively with incomplete knowledge, because all of our knowledge of the world is incomplete, and we still have to function effectively. So I started out looking at navigational space, what some people call the cognitive map. Some years later, I started looking at dynamical systems and dynamical change, how you build models of systems if you don't fully understand them. Later on, I have looked at objects, actions, causality, perception, learning, and now I'm looking primarily at ethics. But I'm treating it as a foundational domain of common sense knowledge. And I have plenty of things to say about these other topics, but I'm going to focus today on ethics. Now, part of setting the context here is that we need to recognize that the world is infinitely complex. Strictly speaking, you want to say unboundedly complex, because people can fuss about the word infinite, but never mind. The world is more complex than we can deal with, and we have limited resources for dealing with it. So how can we possibly cope? Now, AIs have the same problem. They have limited perception, representation, reasoning, and acting, and they have to cope with the world. And many of the things that you see, the limitations of current generation AIs, stem from this problem. The fact that the world's complexity is so much greater than the complexity of the humans or the AIs. Well, we all know how we do this. We build models. And so scientists and engineers spend a lot of time building models of things. And when those models work really well, then you can draw very useful conclusions. But they do have problems. So
By the way, Ben,
Yeah.
real quick, we're not seeing your slides advance if you're advancing them, so we just wanted to double check there wasn't a problem. Yep.
Now, what I'm gonna do is to go into presenter mode.
Okay, let's see if we get that.
So now you should have just the slide and not the sidebar.
It is not transferring over. It's not taking us into presenter mode with you. Fine.
Okay, how did we fix that?
Maybe you need to.
Somebody there has to be good enough at this.
Let's. Do we have anybody who knows? I mean, I suspect maybe you're sharing the wrong window. Maybe that it's shifting to a different window when you go into presenter mode.
Well, let's see. Now let me get back to. Oh, it's not Zoom, is it? No, it's.
No, it's Meet. Yep.
So it's Google Meet.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, yeah, right, okay. Now, all right, stop presenting.
Okay.
Well, that doesn't do you any good.
As I said, I've got the room for a while, so if we need a sec to figure this out, all good. I set the rules.
Well, no, it's, all right, now.
And I wanted to
Oh,
give
no.
you more time
How about
to.
this? I'm gonna try. I think I said allow to share. Allow to share window is what I picked, and it gave the wrong window. And now what I wanna do is I say, share this window.
Okay. Let's see what we get.
And
Okay.
now I go, do you see the presentation without the sidebar?
We see it with the sidebar.
Okay. All right.
I wanted to give us more time, but I didn't get into the room till late this month. Sorry about that.
Okay, stop present. Yeah.
And if anybody in this room does consider themselves an expert on this, feel free to suggest
That's
things.
when you need to
I'm
just do a slide
no
show.
expert, but I was wondering if you went into presentation mode before pressing the share button. Maybe presentation mode is creating a new window or something.
A suggestion then, somebody's saying go into presentation mode and then share.
Now let's see if I can do this. All right, so here's this. Now I go into presentation mode. Use presenter view, okay, maybe that's better. No.
Kevin, I'm getting a message, that, viewers at home are not seeing.
I know I just told them we're working on it. Yep. Swear, every month there's some new fun thing with live streaming. I clearly have a future as a, influencer ahead of me. Okay, fingers crossed.
Now what are you seeing?
Let's see what we're seeing. Well, we're seeing something different. We're seeing your whole screen now and mirrored, including us again.
All sorts of crap. Stop present.
Okay. It was different, so that changed something.
Let's see. Troubleshooting and help.
So Kevin, you checked your messages,
Yeah.
that was what was.
Yeah, I know. So
Kuipers itself is a technical difficulty, Kevin.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah. Take this, put this here. There. Screen. Like that. No.
Just the whole thing. Then here's another possibility. If you could email me the slides, maybe I could share them for you. If
I
we
can
can't
do
figure
that.
this out.
Okay,
Well, this would without animation.
Or, you know, if it's really just about the animations, we could also just share them how we can.
well, no, it's not just about the animation because you can't even advance from one slide to the next.
Oh, I see, okay.
All right, well, let me just, I'll send you the slides.
Yeah, and we'll see if I have better luck, okay. Oh, geez, everyone, I swear, every month something with this screams, every month.
Well,
And something new.
Yep, always something new. Yes.
So, not that it helps you this much right now, but I have found with Google Meet, the best option is simply to have a second computer where it only displays the thing you wanna show, because otherwise it's always like this, it's all over the place.
And I would be using Zoom, the problem is that board only wants to work with Meet, so,
I see.
so I'm somewhat technically limited.
Gotcha.
Yes, whoops. Yep. Alright. So yeah, then I guess, or you can email me them, I will try and get them up.
yes, now, as you might expect, I have a large number of slides, and this, let's see here.
Hey Ben, when you click
Yeah.
share, are you seeing like a collection of different windows that you can actually choose from to share? Like when you click present now, what do you see?
One moment here. Why am I?
The intellectual firepower in this room, surely we can solve this.
Yeah. Now, what I can't seem to do. Okay, now I am simply not able to get back to Safari. It wants me, let's cancel this.
Oh, good.
Let's get back here. Okay, yeah. Oh, I see where that is, yes, okay. All right. Now. Hidden. Okay, it should be on its way to you.
Okay, you sent it to me, alright, I'm looking for it.
Yeah.
Alrighty. And then it'll be my problem if I can get it to run. Alright.
No,
Okay, just got
no
it.
problem.
Got 'em?
You got it. I'll be right
presentation display.
Alright, slideshow settings. Presentation mode.
It said their presentation display, is that an option?
Presentation mode, full screen or in a window. Let's do it maybe in a window, maybe it's the full screen that's confusing it.
Oh, you're in LibreOffice too.
Yes. Alright, let's see. Open source.
There. There.
That might be better now. If I
That's better.
Close that. Ah, okay.
Cool.
Alright.
Now can you proceed with
Now,
that?
actually, you're.
Okay, and if I click, yes, they move. Okay, I think this is what we're gonna do.
All right.
Okay, so you tell me to advance and I'll advance, okay?
All right. So I've been working in this for a long time. I think that AI is incredibly important for the following reason. Click. What I have spent my career on is looking at common sense knowledge. And I decompose that into foundational domains. And I've worked on a bunch of those, starting with navigational space, then moving on to dynamical change, dynamical systems, objects, actions, causality, and so forth. Click.
Yeah.
And, no.
Oh, I went too far? Okay.
You went too far.
Let's see, can I go back? Let's find out. Yes, I can. Yay. Okay, there we go.
Okay. And so now I'm working on, ethics, treating ethics as a foundational domain of common sense knowledge. So what I mean by foundational domain is that people need representations of knowledge in particular domains so that they can make sense of that domain and solve problems in that domain. They may have to switch from one domain to another. So you would use your knowledge of navigational space to find your way to the room you're currently in. You would use your knowledge of objects and actions, for example, to pick up a cup of coffee. Ethics has a variety of purposes that I'm going to go into in a little while. Click. One of the critical issues that all of this, that all aspects of AI and actually almost everything else has to deal with is that the world is unboundedly complex. And so we only have limited resources for reasoning about that. But nonetheless, we have to do well enough to make our living in this world. Like, and the same problem applies to AIs. So if we're going to build intelligent systems, whether they're embodied as robots or whether they are disembodied AIs like LLMs, then they still have to deal with the fact that they are not as complex as the world is. Click. Now, as technical people, we know perfectly well that the way we deal with things is by building simplified models. And the point of a model is to select out a small set of elements, objects sometimes, relationships among them, and in the belief that by reasoning with that small subset, we can do a very good job, maybe not a perfect job, but a very good job of reasoning about something that'll happen in the real world. So we can make a plan within a model and then carry it out within the real world and get the result that we planned. Now what a model really does is it says, let's take this infinite complexity of the world and we'll focus down on the small manageable complexity of the model unknown unknowns are effectively invisible. And this can lead to any number of problems. Like,
No, there you go.
okay. So, obviously models are what scientists and engineers use all the time. And we get very good at using particular, carefully selected models and understanding their limits. Now, as people use common sense knowledge, we do much the same kind of thing. So, we all have cognitive maps. We find our way around in the world, and we know the limits and the powers of these cognitive maps. And if you talk to each other about your cognitive maps, you'll discover that you have different types of cognitive maps. Not just covering different pieces of geography, but representing different aspects of the world. Now, in some cases, for solving certain problems, you can just pick a particular model or in a particular foundational domain, and that solves your problem. But very frequently, you have to go from model to model. Now, one of the dangers, and this is a danger that is very present in ethically problematical situations, is we pick the wrong model. We have a model that leaves out something that's actually important. And when you leave that out, then it becomes invisible. A bad model leads to bad action decisions. Like, so when I started looking at AI, I started looking at many of the different problems and decided to focus on common sense. Like, so within common sense, I've already talked about the aspects in the physical world, navigational space, dynamical systems, objects and actions, affordances, and so forth. But another whole major branch of common sense knowledge is knowledge about the social world. In the physical world, you're reasoning as though you, the agent, are the only agent in the world. But in the social world, you're in a world full of agents. And so some of the foundational domains involve theory of mind, imitation, and ethics. And so ethics is not just how do I accomplish a goal, but what is okay to do? What goals are reasonable to pursue? What actions are reasonable to take on the way to that goal? And so a key piece here is how to get the right model. Click. So you start talking about ethics, and the first question, the obvious issue, is that philosophers have been thinking about this for 2,500 years, plus or minus. Now there are many different schools of thought about ethics, but the three major ones are virtue ethics, deontology, and utilitarianism. And utilitarianism is particularly preferred by people in AI because it's got a nice body of mathematics. But we really do have to understand all of them. So to understand virtue ethics, there are a variety of virtues that people are familiar with. And the Scout's Law gives you an interesting example enumerating a bunch of virtues. A scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. The opposite of each of these virtues is a vice. A person who is virtuous, who follows virtues is virtuous. A person who follows vices is vicious. Another major school is deontology, which really is thinking of ethics in terms of duties. And from a computational point of view, we often think of these as rules or constraints. Examples would be thou shalt not kill, dealing with contracts, care, other kinds of things. Click. So, the sort of paradigm situation for reasoning within a utilitarian model is that you're sailing along and you reach a decision point. And you start at the question mark, you reach the decision point, do you go and pursue A or do you pursue B? What should we do? Well, utilitarianism says we need a utility measure which says how much do we prefer various options, and we want to maximize that. We choose the greater good or the lesser harm, and this translates nicely if the utility of A is greater than the utility of B, then do A, otherwise do B.
you're
Yeah,
familiar.
okay. Yep, I can see.
Good.
Now, excuse me. The trolley problem was created by professional philosophers and is a tool for generating certain thoughts. When people started thinking about autonomous vehicles, they started saying, well, we could be able to translate the trolley problem into a problem for autonomous vehicles, and then we can really focus on that. And part of what I'm doing here is critiquing that process. But the problem is, here you are sailing along, you are an autonomous vehicle, and you have some passengers who you are responsible for. And you turn into a narrow road that where you can't pull over and your visibility is limited. And all of a sudden a pedestrian appears in front of you. And you can't stop in time. And you have to make a decision. The only thing you can do, you can either hit the pedestrian and kill them, or you can crash the car and kill whoever's in the car. So what do you do? Like, so a group of people, this was at MIT, created something called the moral machine, which made a graphical version of this on the internet and said, okay, here you have a car with 5 people in it, and all of a sudden you see 5 pedestrians and you can't stop. If you crash into the barrier, you kill all the people in the car. If you swerve and go through the crosswalk, you kill all the pedestrians. And you have 2 buttons, A and B. What do you do? Well, how do you make a decision? Like, so the moral machine gives you a bunch of demographic information about the passengers and the pedestrians, and then gives you the 2 buttons and says, what are you going to do? Now, this is very popular. Got 40 million decisions in hundreds of countries. Naturally, the sample was self-selected. There's a lot of methodological questions about this, but they got a whole lot of data and published a lot of papers. It's like, so suppose you're a human driving this car. What should you do? Suppose that you are a robot. You're the autonomous robot. Or you're the person programming the autonomous robot. What do you do? There have been examples of this, which I don't have time to go into. And if I had more time, I would actually ask for people to give suggestions, because this is an interesting problem. Like, one of the problems that keeps coming up is that you need to think outside the box. What's the box? That's part of the challenge of doing ethical thinking. Click. Now there's a wonderful movie, War Games, I believe, from the 80s.
Suspect this room has seen it.
What?
I suspect this room has seen it.
Yes, have you all seen it? How many of you have seen it? Raise your hand. Okay, good. So as you know, at the end, the AI supercomputer says, interesting game. The only way to win is not to play. So how do you do that? Well, the question is there an extreme decision point? in fact, we teach young humans to drive all the time, and we teach them to look ahead and avoid this kind of deadly dilemma. It's part of teaching the skill of driving. So you need to identify these upstream decision points, make the right decision there, and avoid the problem. And if you can't do that, that's actually considered worst outcome? Click. How come? Why did you get the worst outcome? Well, the cooperative solution is clearly a better one, but it requires you to trust your partner. And your partner had better be trustworthy. Now, was that in my presentation of the model? No. So that was omitted. Now, of course, social psychologists create versions of this and they administer it to classrooms full of college sophomores. And one of the things that they discovered is that humans, by and large, when presented with games like these, consider better models and make better choices. Except for majors in business and economics. And those guys have been taught game theory, and they follow the game theory algorithm and get a worse outcome. So here, by having a model that omits trust and trustworthiness, utility maximization is designed to exploit the vulnerability of your partner. So another major lesson is to the importance of getting the utility measure right. Because if you leave things out that are actually important, you're in a lot of trouble. Click. So Aristotle, 2,500 years ago, said that ethics is a skill, just like carpentry, and is learned and practiced. He used the word phronesis in Greek, which translates roughly as practical wisdom. And so when you have those skills to formulate the problems correctly, both the structure of the decision and the utility measure, then you face tough choices less often. Life works out better. I actually like to say that ethics in a lot of ways is non-obvious self-interest. So it's important to learn and understand ethics in your own self-interest. Click. what it does is it teaches them how to be trustworthy, how to signal to others that you are trustworthy, and how to recognize whether others are trustworthy. And so there's a bunch of ways that you can recognize trustworthiness. I'm not going to go into that right now. Click. But if it turns out that a partner is not trustworthy, then people are not going to offer to cooperate with them. They're going to get fewer opportunities to cooperate. They're going to get fewer and smaller rewards. So there is an evolutionary process going on. Click. So, winding back to this question of the complexity of the world. The world is unboundedly complex, which means that simplified models are necessary to function in the world. But come into for a landing here, it's pretty clear people have been worried about technology for a really long time. Socrates thought that the written word was a terrible thing and it was really going to ruin society because it meant that you can't have an active live discussion with a book. We work on that, and so there's a bunch of other examples here. The printing press versus the religious authorities, the Luddites and looms, Charlie Chaplin in Modern Times, and so forth. HAL in 2001, Space Odyssey, Skynet and Terminator 2. And there's lots of other examples that we've seen. Click. Now, a lot of people talk about existential threats to humanity, and some people are worried about that. I'm worried about existential threats, but my top three are climate change, infectious diseases, and nuclear war. I do worry about superintelligent AI, but it's way down on the list. Click. One of the things to keep in mind is that responding to changes, to problems, threats like climate change, diseases, and nuclear war, is going to require global cooperation, which is going to require trust and trustworthiness. How are we doing on this? Got a problem? Yeah, me too. Like, so now I haven't talked about these issues, but there are a bunch of the things that we think about when you start thinking about having a course on AI and ethics. Will AI take all the jobs, most of the jobs, leaving many people in desperate straits? Will AI eliminate privacy, tracking all of us everywhere all the time? Will AI embody and enforce human bias against minorities of various kinds? Will AI take inhumane actions based on its own notion of rationality, perhaps harming humanity as a whole? Incidentally, one of the things, whenever I talk about rationality, I tend to put scare quotes around it. If someone talks about being rational, put your hand on your wallet, because they're trying to pick your pocket. That is really one of the places where people try to sneak in something. They sneak in their conception of the correct model, and it may well be the wrong one. So one of the questions is, how do we think about all of these? And the ideas in the small picture and the big picture are parts of dealing with them. Click. So one of the things we need to do is understand the critical roles of trust and cooperation in the functioning of our society. And we need to make
first?
Yeah, you.
Alright. This is gonna be hard. I have a lot of questions.
We can come back to you, but give us your first one.
My first one is, is there any model for absolute truth here, or is it all probability about a probability?
The question basically is there any absolute ethical truth we can work off of, or is it all mathematical probabilities at the end of the day?
No.
Would you care to elaborate on that to quote the famous David Lynch interview?
There is no absolute truth. And I would say period. Just one kick. Let me just close the door to my study.
All good.
Getting some background noise here. So I think the question of sort of what is truth and is there absolute truth is a very interesting and one of these philosophical questions. And I think the answer really is that there is real, honest to goodness, definable truth in artificial domains like mathematics. And since a model is a mathematical object, there is truth within a model, but the world itself is not a model. It is an infinitely complex thing, which you can only describe more or less adequately. And so, even the whole notion of truth is somewhat questionable. Now, so what do you do about that? And is everything probabilistic? Well, probability is one tool, one of many tools to use to represent incomplete knowledge. But it's certainly not the only way to represent incomplete knowledge. And there are plenty of others. Now, so if we take, suppose we take one of the deontological rules, thou shalt not kill. Is that true? Yeah, it's true. Except maybe there are some times when it would be okay. But by and large, acting as though it's true is the right thing to do. If you drive on our streets, are you supposed to drive on the right side of the street? Yes, you're supposed to drive on the right side of the street. Is it true that you must drive on the right side of the street? Well, almost always, but there are times when you would not. So, but I think saying is the alternative of absolute truth reasoning with probabilities? The answer is no. Reasoning with probabilities is one tool that helps you reason with incomplete knowledge.
Yeah.
Another question? Okay.
Yep, that's your question.
Hi, Professor. My question is about meta-ethics. I'm curious whether you think that artificial intelligence can help us discover new things about ethics, or whether it might discover its own ethics for itself.
Okay. I do think that thinking about ethics from an artificial intelligence perspective can teach us new things about ethics. I think some of the picture that I have painted here is new. I mean, it draws on a whole lot of ideas from a lot of other people. So it's, but super intelligent creature that reads all the world's knowledge and thinks as deeply as any human about that knowledge, then yeah, it might well come up with new ideas. And what I would hope is that it would also understand the importance of behaving ethically. As I said, ethics is not obvious self-interest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll pass the question up, so yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think it kind of dovetails a little bit with the two past questions. You know, right in the middle of whether ethics is relative and also whether we can derive some kind of meta ethics. So on the topic of superintelligence, so a
No,
recent
excuse me a moment. There's enough reverberation there.
Oh, I'll repeat it. She's gonna say it and I'll
do you
repeat.
want me to come up?
Yeah, maybe come up, yeah.
Okay, maybe that's
Yeah, come
just
up.
so you know.
Come up. These are the mics, Ann, so anywhere near here, he should hear you.
Great, awesome. All right, great, awesome. So, on the topic of superintelligence, you briefly mentioned.
Yeah.
So, recently there was an interview with Elias Sutskever, who is the co-founder of AAAI, who just recently started studying superintelligence. Yes. So, he was musing on ethics and on kind of how we optimize for superintelligence and ethics and superintelligence. And one of the things that really resonated with me was that he mentioned we need to optimize for sentience. You know, there's been a lot of focus on, you know, human interests, like what we humans, what we want. But if, let's say that superintelligence trains on all the corpus in the world, of not only what we say but what we do, what they're gonna see, they're gonna see two things. We have selected ourselves out of the biosphere from other species. And not only that, but we're also using a classification system where anything that we deem less intelligent than us, any species, any cognizant sentient species that we consider less intelligent than us, we can do essentially whatever we want to do. So that begs the question, when we get a superintelligence that considers us less intelligent, what's going to happen?
Well, for one thing, only some people draw those conclusions, right? So, some people think that things which are less intelligent should be disregarded as having no ethical significance. And that's not, humanity as a whole doesn't agree on that position. One of the things we see in humanity is that we have a great diversity of positions. And something which is learning from humanity would presumably understand the importance of that great diversity of positions. So I don't think that the sort of conclusion of the human race is that anything which is less intelligent than humans can be sort of ethically disregarded. And one would hope that the superintelligent AI would actually learn from the best of us and not just from particular egoists.
Can I just ask one follow-up question?
You're already here, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so just from the utilitarian perspective, we have decided our utilitarian model is that we slaughter animals so that we can eat it. Now, the thing is, like, and we're doing that, the way we justify it is that they're less intelligent than us. So the question then becomes, if from a utilitarian, again, paperclips scenario, like Bostrom's paperclips, if AI decides, oh, we're just gonna melt you all, turn you into paperclips, because that satisfies our interest right now. Now, we're kind of like, okay, who cares? Because the dominant modus operandi of at least, you know, here in the West, is that we are treating species other than ourselves as sacrificing sort of to suit our own needs. So that I guess that's kind of more.
Yeah, well, some societies, it was considered not just morally acceptable, but morally obligatory to sacrifice some of the sort of flowers of the younger generation to propitiate the volcano gods. And if you did this, then maybe the volcano gods wouldn't get angry and destroy your island. Now, as time went by, societies that held those beliefs have become extinct. Now, I'm not quite so optimistic as to say the belief that slavery is acceptable is completely extinct, but at least it's a generally accepted belief that it is not an acceptable way to run a society. So people who do that recognize that they're violating a norm. And so I think with many of these other things, we will evolve. Martin Luther King had this famous quote that the arc of society bends gradually, but it bends towards justice. Now, the gradually sometimes it looks like it might be bending the other way. And that's pretty tough too. But I think there's reason to believe that it actually does move in certain directions. And some of the beliefs that we currently have today are going to be things that 100 or 200 years from now, people are going to say, how could they possibly tolerate that? And it may well be that slaughtering living animals in order to eat their flesh would be considered one of those. But it's not today. I mean, that's held by some people and not by everybody. And so I think this is a process. Evolution is a process. Fascinating.
Thank you so much, I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More questions?
I will, do, that I run the meetup, because I could frankly talk to you the whole time, but I'm gonna get one in here before I give another one to the room. So some of the things I've been thinking about, do you think, so if we have AIs acting as ethical, and now that I think about it, it does intersect maybe in an interesting way some of what we've been talking about. Do you think AIs as ethical agents in our societies who themselves need moral and ethical rules under which they are guided, is that possible when we're not letting them develop their ethics as is inherent in their model training weights? We're putting guardrails on them, specifically guardrails that may not serve any ethical interest beyond the bottom line of the corporation that runs that AI.
I think this gets tangled up in a number of issues, and one is that the current state of the art in AI, the deep neural net revolution has solved some amazingly important and hard problems, and has made possible certain kinds of major advances. But it hasn't solved the problem of intelligence. It has taken us a significant step forward. But we're a long way from creating genuine artificial intelligence, human level artificial intelligence. And so the notion of saying, let's should we be thinking about allowing ChatGPT to have the kind of freedom are you gonna let your toddler play in the street in order to allow it to develop its skills at avoiding traffic? No, of course you're not gonna. Because it's simply not ready. And someday that day may come, or it may not. We'll just sort of have to see.
Yeah, you. Next question, come.
Alright, hi Ben.
Yep. Hi.
So, I think, one of the things you've talked a lot about is trust. And, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is sort of, the mechanisms of trust as they apply to AI. So I think that, one of the reasons that trust works among people is we can recognize each other as agents, and in some sense there's auditing, right? So you look at people and you go, are they doing what we agreed on? There's reputation and communication of that reputation. So if you discover that someone is untrustworthy, you tell all your friends. One of the things that has really scared me about AI and certain related technologies is, we no longer have intelligences that are just confined to people, right? And so, to give an example, if we have all these automated cameras that can recognize your car, most people don't even realize that these things are there, and have the potential to track everyone that's going everywhere all the time. And so without this recognition that you're dealing with another agent, and then auditing it and communicating it, well, it seems like our mechanism of trust has a problem. And so I wondered if you had any thoughts on how we might approach, basically applying that mechanism to these things that now come in a great diversity of appearances.
Yes. So one of the, I think this is a very, very interesting issue, and it also gives me an excuse to kind of open up the question of what an AI is and whether something has to be considered an agent in our society and how we would come to trust it. Turns out that the AIs that we work on that are based on digital computers are raising all of these prospects. But in fact, the world has already been taken over by artificially intelligent creatures. And if you look at corporations, they are artificial. They are goal-oriented selling certain things because they were operating within these publicly known constraints that were actually enforced on them. That if you try to make cosmetics out of lead, then you will be prohibited from the marketplace. And of course, if you're a profit-making corporation, being kept out of the marketplace is a death sentence, as it should be. So there's a nice example. Some of you may remember when somebody went and poisoned Tylenol capsules, and so various people bought Tylenol at their drugstore and took it for a headache or something and died. And Johnson & Johnson, I think, was the company that made it, and they took all of their products off the market. So the CEO announced that they were withdrawing all of their pharmaceuticals from the market. It cost them probably $100 million, and that was many decades ago. And it saved the company because it preserved the trust that people had in the products of that company. So I think it's important for corporations to know that they live and die in part based on the trust people have for them. It's important for us to know that agencies of our government can enforce reasonable rules and constraints on things that companies can do. Now, we're not doing an ideal job of that, and in recent history, things have been getting substantially worse. But I think it's important to recognize that this is an existential threat. This is an example of how certain kinds of tendencies are an existential threat to our economy. Maybe not our species, but our economy. There's a lot more to be said about that, but I think if you look at corporate entities and at individual humans and at digital computer-based AIs, there are interesting similarities and differences that shed a lot of interesting light on these questions.
I feel like I should make a pun about trust busting to build trust, but can't quite put my head there.
Got our new slogan there. Who else? Yeah, one last one.
Howdy, Owen McNally from the Austin Science Network here. So I'm wondering,
Great, nice to meet you.
yeah, we were at UT at the same time, never met, but wanted to all these years, actually.
Oh, great.
So I'm wondering if you thought about cooperation, trust, AI alignment relative to the voluminous debates in evolutionary biology about altruism and cooperation and group selection, and like thinking about like game theoretical models of where cooperation, or at least maybe faking cooperation, actually prevails. So Darwin suggested that a group of our ancestors that were more cooperative, more altruistic, would have had higher fitness than ones that were less cooperative and less altruistic, and that led to all these debates about group selection, which might be the single biggest debate among those guys. So there are game theoretical models that would suggest maybe that it's in the interest of AIs to cooperate with us and to have evolved ethics that are cooperative. Maybe there's other models that would say, well, they should instead fake it until it's too late. What are your thoughts on this space?
Okay. I think that group selection is actually a real thing. That Darwin was right. That I think it became an ideological position that there was no such thing as group selection. That it was only from the behavior of individuals and their reproductive fitness. box. Let's see, I'm trying to think if I could just quick put my hand on one of these books, but I have so many of them here that I can't necessarily pick out. Anyway,
What are the implications for AI and how you think about cooperation, altruism, and AI ethics and AI alignment?
well, is it altruism?
Or maybe reciprocal altruism. You know, I scratch your back, you scratch my back, reciprocal altruism.
You know, I was collecting examples of things that sort of violate that picture, and one cultural belief in the military, and I think it's particularly strong in the Marines, is that you bring your comrades home, even if they're dead. So how can that possibly be to the benefit of the society? Because, I mean, people die trying to fetch the dead bodies of their comrades. But it's a very deeply ingrained part of that culture. So what is the function of that belief, of that cultural belief? Well, the function is, you're doing something dangerous, you could die, but if you die, your comrades will bring you home. What's the function of guaranteeing a retirement for people who are too old to make a contribution anymore to the society? Well, part of that is that you can trust that if you spend your life taking care of other people, when you need it, they'll take care of you. Now, from an evolutionary, from the point of view of somebody who says, well, does that help the lives of the younger people who are supporting these older people? What it does is it creates a certain kind of trust in the society that allows people to spend their lives working on things, that allows people to commit to certain careers or to raising a family. So I think when you start to think about what makes a society viable, it depends on a bunch of very deep, long-lasting notions of trust that go well beyond when somebody is, the portion of somebody's life when they're actually being productive. And so I think if an AI is to be part of a society, then it needs to understand what it means to be part of a society, and to recognize that taking that role is actually a very important part, and it has pragmatic benefits for the ability of that society as a whole to continue to function. Now, let me take one more example, turning to the issue of corporations. One particularly destructive, oversimplified model that's often applied to corporations is the statement. Now, I attribute it to Milton Friedman because he popularized it. He's not the originator, but the notion that the purpose of a corporation is to maximize its profits for its shareholders. Not to maximize the welfare of its customers, or of its workers, or of its neighbors, for his suppliers, but for his shareholders. And so this is creating an oversimplified model that says this is our priority, those other things are not priorities at all. And it leads, just like the prisoner's dilemma, it leads to terrible behavior and untrustworthy behavior. And it's been very, very popular. He published an article in the New York Times Magazine in 1970 with more or less that title. And it's been very popular, and their whole ideology is built around it. You go down the block to the business school, and they'll tell you all about how wonderful that is. But in fact, it's clear, just clearly empirically, it's destructive. It's tempting, but it's also destructive, and it leads to serious problems with the viability of society.
So the lessons
Next
for,
question.
well, the lessons for AI are what though?
Oh, I think that you need to look at these cultural expectations about what it means to live, to function as a member of society. And that you need to be trustworthy in order to earn other people's trust so that they will cooperate with you. And that if you're not trustworthy, you won't get cooperated with, and things will go bad.
Thank you.
And we are running short on time. Maybe we can get one or two short questions in, just because we do have somebody so amazing with us here. I think, well, the dude behind you has not gotten his question at all yet, so let's do, yeah.
I'll try to make it a quick one.
Is there
I
just?
don't think there is a short question in this domain.
I know, and I mean, frankly, your answers are so incredible, I don't think any of us want this to end, but we are getting short on time.
It's great content.
Well, they're not incredible.
Well, I don't know. I've had a large range of speaker quality. You're definitely at the top end.
Well, that's nice, but incredible means unbelievable.
Oh, they're gonna take my
You're
English
quite
degree
clever.
away, dang it. Okay.
Well, not to split hairs over it, but you mentioned the moral machine in your presentation, and I thought one of the most interesting things they did with that is that you could kind of break down and see how different people and different groups value different things, right? So different countries would value, say, youth over old age. I forget the exact thing. Well, let's just say hypothetically, maybe China would be like, oh, spare the grandparents, where the United States might be like, oh, spare the stroller. And I find often, when you have a diverse set of real life friends, you're trying to model their mental model, so oh, this is my friend who values safety over freedom, whereas I might value freedom over safety. And so long as you're not really contesting those points, it's usually not like a deal breaker. I think one interesting thing with AI is we can theoretically peer deeper into their behavior than human behavior. So I was really just wondering if you've seen anyone that's doing sort of the work of building the mental models for us to look at AI and say, oh, I want to work with a model that values freedom over safety, or maybe I want to work with a model that values safety over freedom, and just making those choices visible to the end user rather than having to sort of prompt it and build your own mental model of its mental model.
Okay, I think that's a fascinating and important question. And the fact that there is a wide range of individual variation here is really important. Now there was some reaction that I had to your initial presentation at this point, and I was getting so caught up in the things you said subsequently that I've forgotten what that was. Can you briefly summarize how you started this argument?
Yes, people would sort of like rank their values differently. Even though we both care about freedom, we both care about safety, I might value one over the other.
Now, I thought that was actually quite interesting too, that, I mean, and they made arguments about the variation across cultures around the different, parts of the world. The deep problem, I think, is the framing of the problem that you can learn something from the moral machine experiment that will tell you something about how autonomous vehicles should drive and should make decisions about how to drive. That the notion that perhaps an autonomous vehicle in China would drive a different way from the autonomous vehicle in the United States, and make decisions about, I mean, who you're gonna kill if you're stuck with this dilemma, I think is a deep error. The fact that different groups have different priorities is nice to illustrate, but I think confusing it with this is going to teach us how to program autonomous vehicles is a big mistake. Now, as far as I can tell, the companies that build autonomous vehicles now and in the past and in the future have completely ignored the moral machine experiment. That they recognize that this is completely irrelevant to the things that they are concerned with. What?
I can definitely corroborate that as a former
Yep.
cruiser.
Yep.
So not in the value function, we do not have a trolley problem sub function anywhere.
I think, because we really are probably going to maybe in a few minutes have somebody telling me we have to get out, I'm going to pose a final question to end this on, and then I'm gonna tell everybody to thank Ben for an amazing presentation. I'm gonna want to take us back a little bit and touch into something that you talked about a little bit, which is you correctly pointed out that whatever we're dealing with LLMs, as impressive as it is, you know, we're not dealing with real AI, and therefore we're not dealing with a real ethical agent, at least not yet. And you know, as you also kind of alluded that, you know, you look at existential risks and, you know, you rank killer AI pretty low on there compared to a number of others. I probably don't have to guess what you think of the doomer AI contingent, but I just find myself sort of wondering, okay, so where does that leave us though, as for now still the main remaining ethical agents, or at least, you know, we could talk, as you said, about corporations, but we could debate how ethical they've been being recently, thanks to our friend Mr. Friedman. Where does that leave us as ethical agents in our interactions with these LLMs or these other not quite yet moral agents that we're dealing with? We have many people asking questions, is it even moral to use these tools? And they